Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the IRU Apply and TI European Road Freight Rate Development Benchmark webinar for Q3 2025. Thanks all for joining us again, and we'll just wait a few moments for participant numbers to stabilize, and then we'll get started with our session. Okay, it looks like attendee numbers have stabilized now. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the IRU Apply TI European Road Freight Rate Benchmark for Q3 2025. Today, we'll be giving you our webinar presentation on the latest report, which is also out today. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. It's been a very interesting quarter once again for road freight rates and the whole overall European road freight market. So we're going to be diving into that all today. I think over the course of this year, it's become clear that perhaps things haven't been as catastrophic as maybe people expected when the tariffs were first announced and the general economic backdrop obviously being so weak early in the year. But of course, we have still seen some weakness in the market. So we're going to try and navigate that with you today. Notwithstanding that, we have seen rates pick up a little bit in Q3. So it's the overwhelming story of the overall market in Q3. But of course, amongst weakness in demand. And a relatively benign cost picture. So we're going to be trying to explain exactly what's happened in the market and what we expect to see in the next quarter and out into 2026 as well today. Now, in terms of the presentation, as ever, we'll do about 30 minutes on the content, which will be taking you through rate development and supply and demand side picture. And then we'll have a 10-15-minute Q&A session at the end. So please do feel free to ask any questions you have during the course of the session using the Q&A tool on Zoom. Of the presentation after the session today as well. So you'll receive a copy of the report and the presentation at the end of the session. We'll also be running a poll towards the end of the session, so please be prepared to answer that. And we will be looking at what the road freight rates are likely to do over the next quarter there. Now, if I move on to the next slide, and I welcome our panelists today. I'm your host, Michael Clove from Transport Intelligence, provider of strategic intelligence for the global logistics industry, and in particular.
Yes, Michael, sorry, I think we don't see the slides. I think they're gone.
Oh, my apologies. Let me just quickly reshare. Okay, hope you can see them again now.
Yes, perfect, yeah? Thanks.
Good. All right, sorry about that. And I'm also joined then from TI by Janan Hassan, who is an economist here at TI. Janan's taking over from Nathan, who's been on these sessions for a few quarters now and has been instrumental in designing the analysis and data for this particular webinar. So welcome, Janan. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael.
And I'm also joined by, as ever, Thomas IRU, Chief Executive Officer of Upply. Thomas, could you just introduce Upply for anyone who doesn't know Upply yet?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and hello, everybody. Upply is a transport management platform. We are working for road transportation, ocean freight, and air freight, mainly providing service to shippers and freight forwarders, carriers, to put them in contact to manage all their transports. And by seeing all these transports through the platform and mainly also road transportation, we collect a lot of data. This is our main purpose, to collect and standardize data. And this is exactly why and data that we will be using today to try to understand what is going on in the market at a granular level of city to city or country to country.
Thanks, Thomas. And finally, I'm joined by Marianne Savoni, who is Associate Director of Strategy, Market and Intelligence at IRU. Welcome, Marianne. Could you also introduce IRU for anyone who doesn't know the organization?
Yes, sure. So thank you, Michael. Good afternoon to all. So briefly, IRU is the International Road Transport Organization. So we count a large diversity of members and partners We have national road transport associations. We have large logistics companies, manufacturers, service providers, shippers, and banks. As IRU, we advocate. We advocate at regional and at global level. So at regional, notably at the European Commission level, and also at the global levels, notably at the UN. We develop and manage solutions to facilitate the international road transport globally, worldwide. And finally, IRU provides intelligence services. So everything related to regulatory monitoring for prices by type of energy, advanced decarbonization, market intelligence, driver shortage. So all the data I represent are published on the IRU Intelligence platform, and do not hesitate to reach out to me after the webinar if you want to access or subscribe to the platform. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Marianne. And then before I move on to the next slide, I must just read out a little disclaimer here. So we remind you all that discussions and statements made by participants on commercially or strategically sensitive information may fall within the scope of competition law and be considered as unlawful. We invite you to refrain from sharing any information of such nature or entering into any such discussions, including during breaks. Okay, and now we'll move on to our next slide, which is on methodology and how the data from Upply is actually put together and used for this report and presentation. And Thomas, could you just take us through that quickly, please?
Yes, as I was saying at the beginning, so Upply is providing freight procurement services. So we do sell softwares to shippers and carriers to manage their transport. And here the focus will be on road transportation. We will focus on the data regarding the European road transportation. We do, what is important to have in mind is that we collect what we call transactional data, meaning real price of a real shipment that happen from point A to a point B with all their characteristics. We do have data for FTL, LTL, for general cargo, for reefer, for bulk, for many kind of transports, everything you can think about in Europe. For today and since several years now, for this webinar, we will focus on FTL, full truckload, general cargo. We will have graphs and data regarding spots and contractual prices. The fuel is included, and that's it. And what you will see here on the following slides and the reports is an aggregation of the main rates between the main countries. Keep in mind that you can also go into the detail of a city to city, zip code to zip code, while by using the Upply data.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, so we're going to start off with a view of the overall European picture, and then we're going to look at a series of international and then domestic rate indices as well, which gives you a broader picture of the market. But like Thomas said, if you need the individual data, you should go direct to Upply for that more granular insight. So this is our first slide here, looking at the overall European picture for both contract and spot rates. You can see that we've seen rate growth really in Q3, which is the abiding trend there for both spot and contract. But Janan is going to share with us some insights around what's driving this and the rate of change.
Thank you, Michael. As we can see here, the contract and spot indexes are still coming together. Spot's only about 0.3 index points above contract now, both sitting around 134 index points. Contract rates are up 1.7 points versus last quarter, and spot rates are up by the same amount. Compared to last year, though, contracts up around 3 points, while spot's only up 2 points. A few factors are driving this slight rise. First, retail trade in the EU grew 1% year-on-year in August, mainly non-food products leading the way. Inflation is still weighing on consumer confidence, but it's not as bad as last year. The UK is a bit of an outlier here. Inflation's at 3.8%, which is limiting retail demand. But elsewhere, Germany and France, inflation is stabilized, giving consumers some breathing room. And we're seeing this slight improvement show up in spot rates, which are inching upwards as we head into the busy period. On the industrial side, recovery is still pretty fragile. The Eurozone's manufacturing PMI briefly crossed into growth territory in August. That was encouraging, but then it fell back into contraction in September, so it's still touch and go there. Contract rates, though, they continue to rise steadily, and that tells us businesses are more optimistic and they're securing capacity for what they expect to be a busier year ahead. Consumer demand is still soft, though, and credit conditions are tight. confidence remains fragile. The retail and consumer sectors are recovering slowly, which will probably limit how much spot rates can rise. We've also got tariff uncertainty dragging on exports, especially to the US, and that could put some downwards pressure on international routes, particularly anything heading towards the ports. The cost environment is relatively calm. Inflation isn't accelerating, and the ECB rates are holding near that 2% target. So overall, we're expecting rates to remain stable to slightly positive in the near term.
Thanks, Janine. Yes, so a fairly continuing stable picture of marginal increases expected, and we'll go into that in more detail later on. So that's the overall picture, and now we're going to turn to the demand side issues and looking at volume development and expectations here as well. And Marianne's going to take us through the trend here.
Yes, absolutely. So you can see on the graph the evolution of the road freight volume in trillion ton kilometer from 2020 until 2024. And we also show the IRU forecast 2025 until 2026. So now we are used to see this graph that we are having now on the in the report and also on the slides since the two last webinars. We are trying to update the data whenever it is necessary. The measure we use here of the road freight volume is ton kilometer, because it reflects the best the transport intensity of road transports, and the tons serve here as a proxy for the weight, while kilometers represent the distance. So this is the main, I would say, the most relevant indicator to have a look on the freight volume. In terms of analysis, what you can observe, not what we can see, the freight volume in Europe are expected to see a modest rebound in 2025. And it is very following what just Jenan was explaining in terms of economical context. After the stagnation of 2024, and we are reaching, or we could forecast a reach of 191 trillion ton kilometer in 2025. So, of course, this, I would say, modest recovery is linked to the tentative improvements in the general European economic situation. In fact, the growth is still considered conservative and faces a lot of challenges, notably the persistent driver shortage and also the pressure from the regulatory demands. So the main drivers of the dynamics, clearly, it's a predicted improvement of the European economic situation, which is a key driver for the increased freight transport activity. And this is notably driven by the Spanish and the Polish economies, which is not the case of Germany, which is more facing a difficult economical situation. And we will see it for specific lanes. And the second element, the forecast for the stronger economic growth, is also driven by the household spending, which is expected to boost the demand. So some key risks here need to be considered. And a very important one I want to highlight, the European truck capacity has not expanded significantly due to fewer new registrations that we observe in the Q3. We have fewer than 32,000 units as of Q3 of new registrations. It means a decline of minus 40% quarter on quarter and 10% decline versus 2024. And the major European markets, particularly Germany and France, saw a significant contraction specifically, which is about 17% for Germany and 13% for France. It is also important, on the other hand, to mention that the electric truck sales are growing on the other side and reaching as Q3 about 4% of the market share in the EU. And Netherlands, Germany, and France are the leaders in terms of electric truck registrations in Q3. So just to finish on that, the reasons of this decline or this drop of the registrations is mainly linked with the uncertainties about the tolling. We will mention a lot a lot of information on this topic, and the fuel prices. And we will see that they still represent the main cost drivers, and this is compounded by a volatile tariff situation in the context that we know, notably with US. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, so we'll move on now to supply side issues as well, and some of those charts I think you're just mentioning there, starting off with the diesel prices. begin with, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So in fact, if you take all the different drivers of the costs, fuel prices is one of them. But all those factors together, we didn't mention the rising wages, but they represent also one of also key driver on the increasing costs. All those factors are pushing structural expenses higher for carriers, and typically they are pushed to pass, of course, the bill on to their customers, and on the fuel prices specifically. So we show on the graph the index of diesel prices at pump for France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain. The diesel prices at pump reached an average of 1.5 euro per liter in Q3. So to access the fuel price detail, you can subscribe to our platform. We have a specific service on IRU fuel prices, and you can download the detailed prices on this matter. So what you can take from this, the fuel prices remain relatively stable. If you compare with the Q2, it was approximately the same amount. You have a short period of increase between mid-June and July. And consistently, the crude oil prices stabilized during the Q3, partially due to the increased production from the OPEC countries that are mitigating the geopolitical tensions that we all know. The Brent price began the quarter averaging $70 per barrel in July and reaching about $68 per barrel in September. So you have, of course, this geopolitical context, which is linked with the war in Ukraine, which is, creating a lot of risk around the supply, and notably the fact that Ukraine is targeting Russia's energy infrastructure today, and also the European Union planning additional punitive measures against processors of Russian crude oil following the Russian military flights over Estonia, Poland, and Romania. So I will give few words on HVO prices that you don't see on the slide, but you will have it in the reports. HVO, as you know, are very close to regular fuels and offer a way to reduce the carbon emissions. So it's a readily decarbonization solution, as we say. We have just published a few weeks ago a large report on the HVO and the fact that more and more carriers are clearly investing in HVO. So we definitely need to track and monitor the HVO prices. And we can say that they are stabilized across most European countries in Q3, remaining broadly below the index, except in Belgium, Denmark, and Estonia. But of course, HVO are still higher than diesel, with an average premium of 20% across the EU, reaching 1.91 euro per liter in Q3. Something that I wanted to highlight for you in terms of forecast. And this is I would say, a regulation that is going to create an impact on the HVO demand. HVO demand is expected to rise ahead of 2026 because you have the European countries begin transposing the EU revised Renewable Energy Directive, the RED III, which is introducing higher biofuels targets. So this directive is going to set a target of at least 29% renewable energy in the transport sector by 2030, which is a significant increase from the previous 14% in the RED II. And the transposition of the directive is underway. So member states are required to transpose it to their national law since May this year. And the process is very slow. And today, Denmark is the sole country to have fully implemented the RED III. And several other countries are partially in progress. So Germany, France, Italy, or Spain, for instance. So I will stop here. But I think it was important to mention this aspect, which is going to change the dynamic next year.
Thanks, Marianne. Yes, and apologies if the presentation has been dropping out a bit there. Issue with my connection, actually. But we'll move on then to the toll prices, and you can see quite a few increases planned here. So could you just take us through that as well, Marianne?
Yeah, sure. So we said fuel prices. Toll is one of the, I would say, one of the other big driver of the pressure on costs. You see this map is showing the trend, the tolling prices trends in 25 versus 24. That is part of a dedicated monitoring that we are publishing. We consider here the toll prices evolution as a whole, so it includes the CO2 toll taxation impact. So the colors are showing, of course, depending if the prices are increasing or declining, the different detail. You can see that a lot of countries are showing an increase of the toll prices. Notably in the case of Bulgaria, Spain, Italy, Poland, Netherlands, Denmark, or Sweden. Rates are increasing by, for example, 17% in Romania, 7% change in Bulgaria, bringing the year-on-year change to 20%. In Slovakia, it is increasing in the tolling rate to 40%, 40, and the VAT rate also increased at the same time in July. So this is, just to give this overview on the increase. We don't expect additional changes in Q4. However, you can expect a lot of changes in 2026, and Austria is expected to raise its tolling rates by 7% next year. And I think that you all know that the Netherlands will pass from a time to a distance-based system, raising the toll rate by 7 for Euro 6 Class 1 articulated vehicles doing, for example, 50,000 kilometers per year on the toll network. And just to finish on France specifically, you have the adoption of a regional eco-tax in Alsace, potentially aligned with the Eurovignette framework that has been approved last year in October, and which is paving the way for a possible route by 2027. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, yeah, so quite a few substantial changes coming in the new year there, which will probably push up that cost environment a bit for road freight rates. All right, so the next section we'll move on to is some comparison of domestic rate indexes for 4 key countries here. And Thomas is going to take us through some of the key highlights from this data set.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And I will start by just explaining what we can see on the graph here. So you have an index base of domestic contract rates for the country of France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. How to read this graph? We started in January 2017 at a base of 100 for all indexes. Okay, so it means if we look now at October 2025, it means that Germany increased the most on all this period by 44%, 144, so 45% plus, then Spain, then Italy, then France, and then Italy. So this is how to read the graph. This is important because it doesn't mean that one is above the other in terms of total value or facial value. It's just showing the evolution of rates. What we can see now that once we have done that. I will myself focus on this graph on 2 main countries that are Germany and Italy, and Jenan will then speak on another graph on the 2 other countries. Here, what we see is that first we have Germany and Italy that are quite stable, plus 0.2% on year-on-year for Germany, plus 0.3% year-on-year for Italy. We have France that increased a bit more, plus 2.4% over the year, and Spain that increased, that was the top one in terms of contracts rates, at plus 3.9% over the year once again. We see up and downs. What is important for us is to see the quarterly variations and also the yearly one. So quite stable for Germany, Italy, plus 2.4% for France, plus 3.9% for Italy. Now, if I just focus a bit more on Germany and Italy, as I was saying, why do we look at quite stable countries in terms of the results of offer and demand? That is the price that we see over there. First, Germany continue to face the weakest growth that we have among the G7 economies. The growth is expected the GDP is expected to grow by 0.1% in 2025 after a contraction of its GDP in 2024. So very low increase, even contraction. And if we go in more details regarding the road transportation, we have seen over the past year an increase of the companies, the truck companies that filed for bankruptcy. And we saw in Germany 1.4% of truck companies that were filing for bankruptcy. That was the record in Germany. This is the same case for other countries in Europe, and this is the case for France also. Another statistic is that 39% of forwarders today in Germany are expecting a decline in the transport volume, showing also the weak demand that we have. Now, if I go on the Italy part, and we just lost the slides, but they will come back. On the Italy part, Italy, if we look at the economy of Italy, we have the two major sectors are manufacturing and the export sectors. Both were in decline in August 2025, minus 1.1% for the exports, and this was the same for the manufacturing sector. So we have a case in Italy where the GDP is declining in the Q2 2025 with a minus 0.1%. It's globally speaking over the year, it's expecting to be at 0.4%. So weak also increase of the GDP, meaning weak demand, and the major sectors that are decreasing, meaning also a decrease in the demand for transportation. This is linked with the global economy and also with the tariffs put by the US. Maybe you have heard about the Trump's war against pasta, where some weeks ago the President Trump announced an increase of the tariffs up to 100%, 17% exactly, over different pasta. So it's just for the example, let's say, but Italy, that is strong in exports, is quite hit by that. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, very, very interesting. And yes, if we think of lots of different examples like that in different product categories, where it's really hitting trade very hard. Okay, let's move on to the spot rates then. And Janine is going to take us through some of the key trends here, but certainly we see more volatility in this index.
Of course, thank you, Michael. What's interesting is that domestic spot rates have moved more sharply this quarter than contract rates. And looking at individual countries, French domestic spot rates came in at just over 127, down slightly from month on month and about 3 points below last year. German rates are trending downward as well. They're down almost 13 points since July and about 25 points lower than last year. Italy's sitting at around 108, down about 8.5 points year on year, thanks to a number of factors, some of them Thomas pointed out. Spain's the outlier here, and rates are at 157, up about 6 points since July and 16 points higher than a year ago. France is seeing a moderately weak environment. Wholesale and retail volumes dropped at the end of Q2, then recovered slightly in Q3, and they're still down 1% yearly. And here's the thing, even though inflation is easing, people just aren't spending. They're saving at the highest rate in 45 years. So basically, households have tightened their wallets, which is putting more downward pressure on domestic spot rates. Now, Spain's a totally different story. Retail and wholesale trade are both doing really well. Food and beverage sales are up 5.5% quarterly, and wholesale retail is up over 13%. GDP grew 0.8% last quarter, the strongest we've seen in a year, and almost all of it is coming from domestic demand. Consumer confidence is bouncing back too. So all this activity is pushing Spanish spot rates up because there's just more volume moving around. Back to France though, it's not all bad news. We're seeing some interesting pockets of growth. Food and beverage retail actually jumped 12% year on year. E-commerce is also doing well, especially economics and appliances. And with the holiday season coming up, we could see some short-term upwards pressure on rates from seasonal restocking. But honestly, for a real sustained recovery in spot rates, we really need to see consumer confidence improve and people start being comfortable spending again.
Thanks, Janine. Thomas, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it's just a small comment and answering some questions. Also, what we see here are spot rates directly contracted. I mean, contracted meaning with a real transaction between shippers and carriers of freight forwarders. So this is on the end of the market. This does not include some charges that we can see, some toll charges or else. This include the oil, the gas oil. So it's important also to take into account, take into the fact that the oil decreases as Marianne was showing it. And is what we have seen over the past of October is quite a contracted month where fewer volume on the spot markets. This is the trend is reversing over the past weeks. I mean, this week and the past 2 weeks. We should expect a peak season for the end of the year as usual, but not, I mean, not a very strong change in prices from our point of view.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And we'll then move on to the international ones as well. So again, we're going to be looking at first contract and the spot rates. And Marianne's going to talk us through the main trends on the contracts rate side.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see here on the slide a graph showing the contract rates index for 5 international lanes for this presentation, from Madrid to Paris in gray, from Warsaw to Duisburg in light pink, from Duisburg to Lille in red, from London to Lille in brown, and finally from Lille to London in black. So clearly you can see that all lanes are declining except Lille to London and Duisburg to Lille. And I will focus on, I would say, on 2 lane dynamics here. The recent decline in contract that you can see, the contract rate decline between Warsaw and Duisburg, is reflective of the broader economic climate in the both economies, notably the German manufacturing economy, which is really remaining under pressure, with a total new manufacturing orders that was falling -4% quarter on quarter. And obviously, the automotive sector in particular is struggling to recover, which is the case of notably Volkswagen or BMW. And as of August 25, the total output in the sector dropped 6% month on month and 2% quarter on quarter, and which is the lowest production level in 7 months, which is explaining the dynamics that you can see. On the other hand, contract rates from Duisburg to Madrid registered the largest quarter-on-quarter increase, which is showing an increase of up 13 points, which is an effect of the good performance of the Spanish economy here. The manufacturing production in Spain was up 2% year on year in August. And if you take the sentiment side, the Spain PMI surged to 54 in August, which is the strongest expansion in nearly a year, which is driven by fresh order intake, production growth, and also the renewed momentum in the export demand. That is why there is demand driven by industry on the Spanish side, which is, of course, exerting upward pressure on the contract rates on this route. Looking forwards, and I will focus on Germany specifically, there are plans by the new government to sharply increase the spending on infrastructure and defense, which is expected to pop up growth in the longer term, but economy will struggle for now, buffeted by the US administration global trade war. So therefore, really on the short term, the upwards pressure on the contract rates is expected to be weak. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, very interesting. And then turning to the spot market then, Janelle, what are the key highlights here?
So looking at international spot rates this quarter, we're seeing a bit of a mixed picture. Madrid to Paris is sitting at 132 index points, down slightly from last quarter, but it's actually almost 10 points higher than last year. Duisburg to Lille jumped 8 points over the quarter to 123, though it's still down about 7 points compared to last year. Duisburg to Madrid is up 12.5 points this quarter. And then Lille to London, that's actually one of the sharpest increases we've seen, is up 11 points, both quarterly and yearly. So really, it's a mixed bag depending on the route, but we're generally seeing more upward movement than downward. So while industrial manufacturing is still struggling to recover, food retail is a bright spot for growth right now. Both Danone and Carrefour posted solid results in the first half of this year, and Carrefour Group sales are rising more than 4%, led almost entirely by food. Grocery demand is definitely a factor in pushing up spot freight rates and is driving more restocking activity as retailers prepare for the festive season ahead. And also, there has been this anticipation effect around the tariff truce, encouraging early inventory replenishment. In the UK, the economy is holding up better than expected. GDP rose 0.3% in Q2, slower than before, but it still beat the forecasts. And looking ahead, inflation remains sticky at around 3%, and consumer confidence has dipped slightly, so households are still cautious. Although consumer confidence is weak, retailers are still keeping inventory levels high for the festive period anyway. So spot rates are likely to rise modestly through Q4, supported by the holidays and strong baseline demand for essentials. Inbound rates to the UK in particular should stay firm into the year end before easing early next year. Germany is a bit different. Consumer sentiment is slowly improving, and that's helped by income growth and an expected 4% rise in e-commerce this holiday season. And Spain, stronger industrial demand and manufacturing momentum should keep upward pressure on rates. Overall, essential goods are keeping volumes stable on the short term, and we'll see some support from holiday restocking, but rates growth will probably be pretty modest overall as we head into 2026.
Yeah, very interesting. And that brings us really on to our next section here, which is on the outlook, of course. And so we're going to show results from the sentiment index from the last webinar here, but I'm also going to launch the poll now to ask you what you think is likely to happen to rates over the next quarter as well. So please do respond to that poll as and when you can, and tell us what you think is going to happen to freight rates in the next quarter. But you can see from the results of the last quarter that actually in Q3 we expected a slight increase in freight rates, and that's actually been borne out, I think, with the data that we saw for Q3. So you, I think, were correct last time round in your expectations for rate development over the last quarter. And actually, very few respondents last time round actually.
I think we just lost you, Michael.
Yes, apologies. I'm not quite sure. I keep dropping out for some reason. I will try again, so my apologies for that. I don't think the poll launched either. Let me try again. Go. Right. I'm not sure if you caught my description of the trend from the last session, but basically the expectation from the last webinar was that Q3 rates would increase, and actually that was what happened with the rates that we saw in our overall European index. Even though obviously as we've been through the presentation, we've seen lots of volatility on different countries and different routes, of course, that's within that overall index. Okay. Right. Hopefully that will launch for you now. We may have to, I'm not quite sure why that's not working, but I think we might have to skip over the poll this quarter, unfortunately. I'll see if I can get that going, but in the meantime, perhaps it'd be interesting to get a panelist take on the outlook. I know, Thomas, I usually ask you to comment on the poll results. Unfortunately, we don't have those just yet, but do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on the outlook for the next quarter, what your expectations are for rate development?
Yeah, I will try to, in the meantime, to see if the poll is working or not. I will try to give my takeaway on this one and try to answer also by the meantime some questions that were linked to that. What we can see first is that this pool over the past quarter is run over about 100 or 600 people, so it's quite representative, and it's quite interesting to see that it's matching quite well the first slide that where we have the evolution of rates over Europe. So we were expecting a small increase in the Q3, and this was the case indeed. We had a question also regarding is it a good time to run a tender? This is linked also to these questions. What we see on the market right now is that we had a season also of tenders in September. Some people are renewing their tender in September and October. The increase of rates are not huge. People are not expecting, and even the carriers are not pushing for a huge increase. I'm talking about globally speaking in Europe. We can have some specific cases. For sure, you have additional surcharge, and these need to be taken into account. Surcharge for the CO2, for toolings, for additional regulation. So this for sure will increase. We won't see a decrease on this part, so this need to be taken into account. On the oil price, on the gas well, we are not expecting in 2026 a sharp increase of rates. And globally speaking, the demand should be quite standard, not a big increase also, or let's say a demand that should be quiet. So overall, my opinion is that we should expect in 2026 an increase of rates that will be limited. Some people are talking about 1.5, 2% maximum over 2026. For sure, in certain corridors and for certain reasons, you might have a bigger increase because of additional cost. Marianne was talking about increase of tolling about 7% in certain countries in 2026. So for sure, this will be then passed on the shipper and the final consumer.
Thanks, Thomas. Unfortunately, I don't seem to be able to launch the poll, so I think we'll have to pass on that. But we will send out a poll to participants if you'd like to share your views after the session and try and connect your views on rate development that way. So I think we'll have to move on to the Q&A session now. And thank you, Thomas, there for answering a few of the questions already. We've had a number of questions already, and I believe the team's also answered some, as well as Thomas dealing with a few there as well. There's one here, which looks like a good question for you, Marianne. It's asking, it was mentioned that future regulation in 2030 would require 29% for biofuels in the transportation sector. Do you know, or can you talk about what the current state of biofuels in the transportation sector is and their usage?
Yeah, so I wanted to mention here that we cannot know the share because HVO biofuel is included in the diesel reporting. That's why IRU is doing a survey. We started this year only to better track how the carriers are starting to invest in HVO, so we can try to see if there is going to be an evolution of positive evolution and I would say a sizing of the share that we can communicate. So I wanted to mention this. So in the surveys that we are running every year, we try to monitor this evolution of HVO investments from the carriers.
Thank you, Marianne. We had a number of questions just talking about the relationship really between spots and contract rates. I don't know, Thomas, if you'd like to just answer or give a view on what the relationship between the growth of contracts and spot rates is and whether or not they're sort of correlated. Can we infer from an increase in contract rates, for instance, that spot rates are likely to be increasing or vice versa?
What we can say on that is what we have seen in the past. Usually what we see in the past is that the spot rates is for sure fluctuating more than the contract rates, and a constant increase in the spot rates usually tends to an increase in the transportation in the contract rates. This is what we have done. We have seen with COVID, a sharp increase over the few months, and then it was the same on the contract. This is what we have seen also after the COVID drop. increase of rates and then drop of spot rates, and the contract that were stabilizing or decreasing a bit. Usually the contract rates are not dropping. We don't see that. We see that in the spot, not on the contract. So usually, yes, there is a correlation. If we look at the statistics, yes, there is a correlation. There is more volatility on the spot rates, and usually the spot rates are advancing a bit, the contract one. So this is what we see in the past. I'm not saying that this is what we will see in the future, but over the 5 past years, this was the case.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. And another question here, maybe from
I think we lose you again.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think I'm back again now.
Yeah.
Just going to ask another question for Marianne there, which was about the Toll was just asking where the biggest increases were. I think in the report there's quite a lot of detail there on
Yeah,
on
absolutely. Yeah, it will be Netherlands, which is going to be concerned by the highest increase. And there was a question also on the two, as of today, what we know for the two countries concerned in 2026 is Austria as well, expected to raise its rates by 7%. And as I said, Netherlands, which is going to raise the toll rate by 7% for next year.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there was another question also on yes, on the mobility package changes with the tachograph upgrade requirements. So from your point of view, is this having a serious impact on capacity, or is it likely to have a serious impact on capacity with the tachograph?
No, very briefly,
requirement?
no, because the deadline to retrofit has been extended. The European Commission has extended the deadline for carriers to comply, which is a grace deadline. So today it is giving the time for the carriers to comply. So it is not going to have an impact clearly on the operations as of today.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. And then one other question we have is, do you have insights on carrier margin evolution, as the like cost structure of them is not favorable despite the price increases? Well, TI does track quite a lot of data on road freight margins, but obviously, yes, you know, even though we've got quite a benign cost environment at the moment, margins are very thin at present for carriers. If you want more detail on margins, there's certainly data that TI can help you with as well. Okay. And there's one, maybe our final question, asking what are the expectations in regards to split between rail and road? Will we see more volume move over to road based on infrastructure challenges in rail? And also the fact that diesel is not likely to increase too much during 2026. Well, yes, I think you could say that you know, rail is always more attractive when fuel prices are high and capacity in the road freight market is tight. So you could argue that with a relatively low cost road freight operation at the moment, you know, it's more attractive to use that mode. But obviously there are lots of other benefits to using rail as well. You know, people often speak of the sustainability side of it, but Thomas, I don't know if you have a view on the sort of movement to use road or rail options as alternatives.
Yeah, my view is complementary to yours. I mean, we have a lot of requests from shippers to go on the rail part, or at least on the multimodal rail or sea land. This is a request for sure. Then you have to have the slots directly on the train. You have to take into it on the transit time a lot of information that shows that this is more complex than we think to go in the rail part. But I think the technology is changing for that. It's more and more easy to then buy some train capacities, for instance. This is something that we are working on also at Upply, to have the ability to directly to benchmark or even to book directly either road freight or inland train in Europe. And we see a lot of requests on that. So I think there is a need, there is a demand also for the CO2 part and the environmental part. But we need to have something that is secure in terms of quality and transit time, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, then. Thanks very much for sharing your views, Thomas, Marianne, and Jinan. Appreciate your inputs today. If you want to carry on the conversation, please do get in touch with TI, Apply, or IRU, depending on your question, using the details on the screen there. We look forward to seeing the rest of you in the next quarterly presentation. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and apologies for the technical issues we've had during the session today, but we will be sending out copies of the reports and the presentation recording for you as well if you want to view it again. So thanks, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.